The hallway was dimly lit, bathed in the amber glow of sconces that threw long shadows across the plush crimson carpet. Laughter and music spilled faintly from the bar below, mingling with the scent of whiskey and smoke that clung to the walls. Claire Bennett stumbled forward, her vision swimming, her heels catching on the carpet, as if gravity itself had turned against her. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her breaths shallow and uneven. "Miranda," she whispered, her voice hoarse, trembling. "I don't feel right. I think I should go home." Miranda's arm tightened around her waist, steadying her. Dressed in a figure-hugging red gown, her friend's eyes glittered not with concern, but with something sharper, something secret. She tilted her head, lips curling into the faintest smile. "Don't worry, Claire," Miranda crooned softly, her tone a velvet trap. "You just need to rest. Everything will be fine." Before Claire could form another protest, Miranda pushed open a door to one of the hotel's lavish suites and, with startling force, shoved Claire inside. The world tilted. Claire stumbled into darkness, her body collapsing onto the softness of an unfamiliar bed. Behind her, the door clicked shut, and Miranda lingered for just a heartbeat in the golden glow of the hallway. Her lips curved into a sly, triumphant smirk. Then, without a backward glance, she turned on her heels and disappeared down the corridor. Claire tried to lift her head, but the room swam around her. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She tasted bitterness on her tongue, the afterburn of too much alcohol, or something else she hadn't chosen. Her gaze snagged on a figure across the room. A man sat slouched in an armchair near the minibar, a half-empty glass of whiskey dangling from his hand. Shadows carved sharp lines across his face, a strong jaw, lips pressed into a grim line, eyes half-shuttered by exhaustion and liquor. His presence filled the room dangerous. Magnetic? Claire's lips parted, a faint gasp escaping her. She wanted to speak, to demand answers, to flee, but her limbs were heavy, her thoughts sluggish. The fog in her veins dragged her down. The man rose unsteadily to his feet, each step measured yet weighted by the haze of intoxication. He loomed over her, his shadow blotting out the dim light. "Who are you?" His voice was low, husky, tinged with whiskey and weariness. Claire's heart raced, panic clawing at her throat. She tried to push herself up, but the world tilted, and before she could summon words, everything dissolved into darkness. Morning light spilled through the sheer curtains, painting the room in soft gold. Claire's eyes snapped open. The suite was elegant, almost surreal in its grandeur. Polished marble floors, silk drapes swaying in the air conditioning, a skyline view of Las Vegas glittering beyond the glass. But none of it mattered, because beside her, sprawled across the bed, was a man. His chest rose and fell with even breaths. The sheet draped loosely over his torso. His skin glowed in the sunlight, every line of muscle sculpted, commanding. The harsh beauty of his face was softened in sleep, but it didn't dull the power radiating from him. Claire's breath caught. Terror surged through her as fragments of memory stabbed at her. The amber lights, the heavy steps, the warmth of a stranger's touch. "No. Oh God, no," she whispered, her voice breaking. Her dress was wrinkled, her hair tangled, and the faint scent of a stranger's cologne clung to her skin. Shame and disbelief warred within her chest. She scrambled off the bed, snatching up her clutch and heels with trembling hands. She couldn't stay, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. At the doorway, her eyes darted back one last time. The man lay motionless, the early light brushing against his striking profile. He looked untouchable, powerful even in sleep. A stranger. Claire didn't know his name. She didn't know that this man was Alexander Ward, heir to the Ward dynasty, one of the wealthiest CEOs in America. All she knew was that she had to escape, and so she did. Hours later, as a plane lifted off the Las Vegas tarmac, Claire pressed her forehead against the cold window. Tears blurred her vision, but determination burned beneath the grief. She didn't yet know the consequences of that night. She didn't yet know that within her, a fragile spark of new life had already taken root. All she knew was that she would never look back. The airplane hummed steadily above the clouds, but Claire Bennett felt no sense of calm. Her hands clutched the armrests so tightly her knuckles whitened. Outside the oval window, the neon lights of Las Vegas shrank into a glittering blur, swallowed by the night sky. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and closed her eyes. Her body trembled with exhaustion, but her mind refused to rest. Every time she blinked, she saw fragments of the night before, the dim amber light of the suite, the silhouette of a stranger leaning over her, the suffocating weight of betrayal. A sob threatened to break free from her chest, but she swallowed it down, forcing herself to breathe in silence. No one on this plane needed to know that her world had ended a few hours ago. Paris. The name had been her only thought when she booked the ticket. A place far enough, anonymous enough, a city of reinvention. She had never been there before, had no friends or family waiting, but the distance itself felt like salvation. When the plane touched down at Charles de Gaulle Airport, hours later, dawn spread pale light across the horizon. Claire stepped into the terminal, carrying nothing but a single suitcase and the raw ache of humiliation. She had left everything else behind: her job, her apartment, her so-called friends, and the man she had once thought would be her husband. Miranda's smile still haunted her. Sly, poisonous, triumphant. The first weeks in Paris blurred together. Claire found a small room above a café in Montmartre, where the wallpaper peeled and the pipes groaned whenever the shower ran. She spent her days wandering the cobblestone streets in a daze, clutching a guidebook she barely read. The city was dazzling: golden bridges over the Seine, artists sketching in the square, the Eiffel Tower piercing the clouds. Yet she felt invisible, a ghost drifting through beauty she could not touch. It was in the fourth week that she realized something was wrong. Her body ached in strange ways. Her appetite shifted. Scents she once loved now turned her stomach. When her cycle never came, a sliver of fear cut through the fog. She bought a pregnancy test from a pharmacy near the Rue de Rivoli, her hands shaking as she carried the small bag back to her room. That night, she sat on the narrow bed, staring at the white plastic stick. The result appeared almost instantly: 2 pink lines burning against the paper window. Claire's breath caught. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, no, no." Tears blurred her vision. Her chest tightened, her thoughts splintering. She couldn't even recall his name. She didn't know who he was, only that his touch still lingered on her skin like an unwanted scar. How could she raise a child born from that night? 4 hours, she paced the small room, clutching her hair, whispering arguments into the empty air. She couldn't do this. She had no money, no family, no plan. But every time she pictured walking into a clinic, her heart seized. She pressed her hand lower, against her stomach, and a strange, fragile warmth spread beneath her palm. It wasn't just fear that consumed her. It was something else, something quieter, deeper. Life. By dawn, Claire sat at the window, her eyes swollen, but her heart steadier. Paris glowed pink in the sunrise, the rooftops glistening like copper. She whispered into the light, as if confessing to the city itself, "I'll keep you." Her voice broke, but the words carried a quiet conviction. "I don't know how, but I'll keep you." From that moment, Claire's life shifted. She found work at the café below her rented room, cleaning tables and carrying trays. The pay was meager, the hours long, but it kept her afloat. She enrolled in night classes to improve her French, scribbling notes while exhaustion blurred the ink. She saved every euro she could, trading dresses and jewelry for second-hand coats. Each morning, as she walked through she pressed her hand against her stomach and whispered to the life growing inside her. "Hold on," she said. "We'll make it somehow." Meanwhile, Across the Atlantic, Alexander Ward scarcely noticed the passing days. In New York, the Ward Enterprises headquarters rose like a glass fortress over Manhattan. Alexander strode through the corridors in tailored suits, his jaw sharp, his expression unreadable. Meetings bled into dinners, contracts into negotiations. He drowned himself in work and whiskey. Ignoring the emptiness that clawed at him in the quiet hours, he remembered little of that night in Las Vegas, only shadows, fragments, a soft body beside him that vanished by morning. He had dismissed it with cold efficiency, as he did with most things in life. A nameless stranger, a fleeting indulgence, nothing worth remembering. Yet sometimes, in the dead of night, he caught himself staring at the ceiling of his penthouse, an inexplicable unease gnawing at him. He pushed it away, buried it beneath deals and ambition. Whatever had happened in Vegas, he told himself, belonged to the past. Back in Paris, the months crawled forward. Claire's body changed, her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror, both strange and miraculous. Fear never left her, but it began to weave with a thread of resilience. For every pang of loneliness, there was the flutter of a tiny heartbeat inside her, a reminder that she was no longer just herself. She was two, and she would not run anymore. Paris had a way of testing her. The streets glittered for tourists, but for Claire Bennett, survival was a daily ritual. Each morning, she woke before the city, slipping into a plain black dress and tying her hair into a neat bun. She carried trays at the cafe downstairs, the aroma of roasted coffee beans clinging to her clothes long after her shift ended. The owners, an elderly couple, spoke little English, but grew to admire her quiet determination. Her French was halting, her accent heavy, but she smiled through mistakes and practiced late into the night, whispering conjugations under her breath as she scrubbed dishes. Money was scarce. Some weeks she counted coins at the counter of a second-hand shop, trading in the remnants of her old life silk blouses, leather heels, a gold bracelet her mother once gave her for rent and groceries. Her meals became simple: a baguette, a wedge of cheese, an apple cut into careful slices. She learned the art of making little stretch into enough, and yet, beneath the fatigue, there was a pulse of purpose. She no longer lived for herself alone. When her back ached and her feet blistered, she pressed her hand to her swelling belly and whispered, "For you." The pregnancy carried her through the gray Parisian winter. On nights when rain slicked the cobblestones and wind rattled her window, she curled on her narrow bed, both terrified and strangely comforted by the steady rhythm inside her. Sometimes she cried into her pillow, grieving the life she once thought she'd have, the career she had trained for, the marriage she had nearly promised, the friendships she thought unshakable. Miranda's betrayal remained a wound she could not close, but every kick, every flutter from within reminded her that she was building something new, something no one could take from her. Across the ocean, Alexander Ward lived in excess. The penthouse on Fifth Avenue overlooked Central Park, its windows stretching to the skyline, a palace of glass and steel. Women came and went, their names forgotten before the sheets cooled. His calendar brimmed with black tie galas, charity auctions, board meetings where his voice cut sharper than any blade. To the world, he was the embodiment of success's wealth. Power crystallized into a single figure, but behind closed doors, silence pressed against him like a weight. He would pour another glass of scotch, staring out at the city's endless glow, feeling nothing. Nights blurred into mornings, mornings into nights, until even he began to wonder if all the money, all the empire he commanded, had dulled into emptiness. Occasionally, he remembered the suite in Las Vegas, the faceless woman who had vanished like smoke at dawn. He dismissed the thought as quickly as it came. One night, one mistake, irrelevant, and yet, the memory lingered, an unfinished chord he could not resolve. Spring arrived in Paris, soft and tentative. The trees along the Seine bloomed pale green, and Claire found herself walking slower on her way home, pausing to watch children chase pigeons across the square. Her body was heavy now, her steps careful. Strangers sometimes offered her a seat on the metro, their faces kind, their voices gentle. It was on one such evening, while balancing groceries against her belly, that she paused on the Pont Neuf. The river below shimmered with reflections of street lamps, the city humming softly around her. She leaned against the railing and let her tears fall freely, no longer ashamed. For the first time, she felt the enormity of what was coming, not just fear, but hope. "Little one," she whispered, brushing her fingers across the curve of her stomach, "you're already changing me. You're already teaching me to fight." She returned to her room and began sewing small things, a blanket from old fabric, a set of tiny clothes she bought secondhand. Each stitch was clumsy, uneven, but infused with stubborn love. Alexander, meanwhile, tightened his grip on Ward Enterprises. He expanded into European markets, signed contracts worth billions, watched his face appear in magazines and financial journals. His father, Edward Ward, praised his ruthlessness. Investors hailed his brilliance, but beneath the triumph, a void gnawed late at night. He sometimes dreamed of a pair of frightened eyes staring up at him from a shadowed bed. He would wake with sweat slicking his temples, his fists clenched as if he were fighting something unseen. He told himself it was nothing, just the residue of too much drink, too little rest. Still, the unease remained by summer. Claire's body ached with the weight of impending birth. The cafe owners, worried for her, insisted she take lighter duties. She protested. At first, she needed every euro, but their kindness broke through her pride. She spent more hours at home, reading battered French storybooks she found at a flea market, humming lullabies she barely remembered from her own childhood. Loneliness pressed against her some nights, sharp and suffocating. She longed to share her fears with someone, to lean on a friend, to be held, but trust had become a fragile, dangerous thing. She had learned, too painfully, how quickly love could curdle into betrayal, so she kept her secrets. She whispered only to the child inside her. "You'll never be alone," she promised. "I'll make sure of it." The city outside roared with laughter, music, lovers strolling hand in hand beneath the stars. Claire lay awake, her palm warm against the life she carried, and let the quiet certainty steady her. No matter how the world had broken her, she would not let it break her child. The night Noah Bennett entered the world was one Claire would never forget. Paris was wrapped in winter, snow drifting like feathers against the hospital windows. Claire lay in a sterile white room, her breaths ragged, her body trembling with exhaustion. Hours blurred together in waves of pain and fear. She had never felt so alone, and yet she had never been more determined. When the cry finally rang out, sharp and fierce, tears streamed down her cheeks. A nurse placed a tiny, squirming bundle against her chest. Claire gazed down at the wrinkled face, the delicate fists clenched in protest, and felt her heart split open. "Noah," she whispered. The name had come to her weeks earlier, whispered into the quiet of her small room. Now, saying it aloud felt like sealing a promise. "My Noah." In that moment, the world rearranged itself. Every wound, every betrayal, every fear seemed distant compared to the weight of the infant in her arms. He was fragile, perfect, and entirely hers. The first months were brutal. Nights bled into days as Noah's cries filled the tiny apartment. Claire stumbled through feedings, laundry, dishes piled high, her body aching from sleeplessness. She rocked him until her arms went numb, whispered lullabies until her voice cracked. Money was tighter than ever. She returned to work at the cafe when Noah was only a few weeks old, leaving him in the care of a kind neighbor who had taken pity on her. Guilt gnawed at her every morning she kissed his forehead goodbye, but she had no choice. Rent, food, diapers, they demanded sacrifice. Still, amid the exhaustion, joy bloomed. Noah's first smile, gummy and sudden, erased weeks of fatigue. His tiny fingers curling around hers filled her with awe. Claire would sit for hours, simply watching him breathe, memorizing every detail. The curve of his lashes, the softness of his hair, the way he kicked impatiently when hungry. She learned strength in ways she had never imagined. When Noah caught his first fever, she sat by his crib all night with a cold cloth on his forehead, whispering prayers into the dark. When money ran out before the month's end, she skipped meals without hesitation so he would have enough. Her love was fierce, unyielding, the kind forged only in fire. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Alexander Ward's life followed its relentless rhythm. At 30, he was on the cover of Forbes, hailed as one of the youngest billionaires in the country. Ward Enterprises thrived under his leadership, expanding into new industries, swallowing competitors whole. The business world admired him, envied him, feared him. But at night, in the penthouse overlooking Central Park, silence echoed louder than applause. He poured glass after glass of scotch, trying to quiet the dissonance inside him. His bed was never empty, yet he often woke before dawn, restless, staring into the darkness. He told himself he had everything: power, wealth, control, and yet a gnawing hollowness followed him like a shadow. Sometimes, unbidden, the memory of that night in Las Vegas surfaced, the fleeting image of wide, frightened eyes. He had dismissed it as a trivial encounter, a nameless woman. But the unease remained, buried beneath layers of denial. Back in Paris, Noah grew. Claire celebrated small milestones with fierce pride. His first steps across the cafe floor, his first words, Mamanque whispered with a smile, were victories greater than any she had known. She saved coins, in a glass jar, for his birthdays, bought balloons from a street vendor, baked cakes from scratch in her tiny oven. They built their own world together. Weekend walks along the Seine, picnics on the grass near Saker. See your afternoons chasing pigeons in the square. Claire often worked double shifts, her body weary, but Noah's laughter renewed her spirit. Neighbors came to know them as a pair, the quiet American girl and her bright-eyed boy. The cafe owners treated Noah like a grandson, slipping him pastries when Claire wasn't looking. Paris, once a city of loneliness, became a city of resilience, of love woven from hardship. Yet, despite the happiness, Claire could not silence the ache in her heart. She had built a life, but it was a fragile one. Each year, the weight of responsibility grew heavier, and deep down, she knew she could not hide forever. On Noah's 5th birthday, Claire watched him blow out the candles of a small cake topped with strawberries. His eyes sparkled, his laughter echoing through the little room. She felt both joy and sorrow twist inside her. He was growing fast, too fast, and he deserved more than the narrow life she had carved in exile. That night, after Noah had fallen asleep, Claire sat at the window, staring out at the glittering city. She thought of America, the place she had fled, the place she had sworn never to return. Memories of betrayal still stung, but she could not deny the truth any longer. Her son needed roots. He needed opportunity. He needed a future she could not give him here. The decision came quietly, but with the certainty of a tide pulling her back across the ocean. She would return to New York. Weeks later, Claire stood at the airport, Noah's small hand clutching hers. He bounced with excitement, his backpack slung over his shoulders, his eyes wide at the sight of airplanes taxiing across the tarmac. "Are we going on an adventure, Mommy?" he asked, his voice bright. Claire bent down, smoothing his hair, her heart aching with both fear and hope. "Yes, sweetheart, a big adventure." As the plane lifted off, Paris shrinking below, Claire held Noah close. She didn't know what awaited them on the other side. She didn't know that the man who haunted her past was closer than she imagined. But for the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. New York smelled of possibility and danger all at once. The city roared with honking taxis, flashing billboards, and the ceaseless rush of footsteps pounding the sidewalks. Claire Bennett held tightly to Noah's hand as they stepped out of the terminal at JFK Airport. Her son's eyes widened at the skyline in the distance, where skyscrapers pierced the clouds like steel giants. "It's so big," Noah whispered, all written across his small face. Claire smiled faintly, though inside her chest, nerves coiled tight. "Yes," she murmured. "It's bigger than anything we've known." She had been gone for 5 years, yet the city felt both foreign and familiar. New York had been the site of her greatest betrayal, her deepest wound. Now it would become the stage for her son's future. They settled in a modest apartment in Queens, far from the glass towers of Manhattan. Claire painted Noah's room herself, filling it with stars and airplanes, trying to give him a sense of adventure. She worked tirelessly to re-establish herself, updating her resume, sending applications across the city. One Saturday, she took Noah to a bustling shopping mall uptown. The boy darted between storefronts, tugging her toward a toy shop with wide eyes. Claire followed, laughing softly at his excitement. For a moment, she allowed herself to relax, to simply be a mother watching her child delight in simple things. And then it happened. Noah, clutching a small action figure, collided with an elderly man exiting a bookstore. The toy clattered to the floor. Noah gasped and immediately bent to pick it up. "I'm sorry, sir," he said earnestly, his voice polite, his tone exactly as Claire had taught him. The old man froze. His cane trembled in his grasp as he stared down at the boy. His eyes sharp, seasoned with years of power and scrutiny, widened in shock. It was as though he were staring at a ghost. Edward Ward's breath caught in his throat. The boy's hair, dark and slightly unruly. His eyes, bright yet shadowed with a depth unusual for a child. His smile uncanny, hauntingly familiar. It was Alexander. Alexander, 5 years old again, standing in front of him. Claire stepped forward quickly, her face pale. "I'm so sorry," she rushed out, her hand on Noah's shoulder. He wasn't watching where he was going. Edward shook his head, his gaze never leaving the boy. "No harm done," he said quietly, though his voice held a strange tremor. Claire felt unease ripple through her. She tugged Noah gently away, murmuring another apology before hurrying off. But Edward Ward remained rooted to the spot, his heart pounding. He pulled his phone from his coat pocket with a hand that trembled more than he cared to admit. "Find out everything," he instructed the man on the other end, "about a woman named Claire Bennett and her son." The following week, Claire walked into the towering headquarters of one of New York's most prestigious cosmetics companies, Ward Beauty Group. She had spent nights preparing for this interview, rehearsing answers in front of the mirror, smoothing her nerves with whispered pep talks. She needed this job, not only for financial stability but for the chance to prove herself again. The lobby gleamed with marble, floors, and crystal chandeliers. Claire straightened her shoulders, clutching her portfolio tightly as she approached the reception desk. Moments later, she was escorted into a sleek office for her interview with the senior hiring manager. The questions were rigorous, but Claire answered with quiet confidence, showcasing her years of experience, her creative ideas, her resilience forged from struggle. By the end, the manager smiled. "We'd be lucky to have you, Ms. Bennett. Welcome aboard." Relief surged through her. She had done it. But the victory was short-lived as she stepped out into the hallway. Distracted by the flood of gratitude rushing through her veins, she turned a corner and collided with someone, papers scattered across the polished floor. Claire bent down instinctively, her apology ready on her lips, and then she froze. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair perfectly styled, jaw cut like marble, eyes a stormy gray that could freeze a room. Alexander Ward. Claire's stomach dropped, her breath catching. She hadn't seen him in 5 years, but she knew instantly. The air seemed to crackle. the past rushing back in a torrent of shame and panic. Alexander looked down at her with irritation, then surprise, then something sharper. "You," he said, his voice low, dangerous. Claire forced herself to her feet, her chin lifting despite the tremor in her hands. "Excuse me," she said stiffly, clutching her folder to her chest. Alexander's eyes narrowed. There was recognition there, faint but undeniable. Something about her face pulled at him, though he could not place it. He dismissed the thought, choosing instead to let irritation sharpen his words. "Watch where you're going," he snapped. Brushing past her, Claire exhaled shakily as he walked away, her pulse pounding. Of all the places, of all the companies she was stepping directly into his world, her first days at Ward Beauty Group were grueling. Alexander Ward was known for his ruthlessness, and he lived up to every rumor. He ran meetings with brutal precision, tearing down ideas without hesitation. His standards impossibly high, and somehow he seemed to take particular delight in making Claire's life difficult. He assigned her tedious tasks, demanded revisions late at night, questioned her competence in front of others. Claire gritted her teeth, refusing to break. She reminded herself why she was here. Noah. Everything was for Noah, so she worked harder. She double-checked every report, stayed later than anyone else, brought fresh ideas that surprised even Alexander's seasoned board. When he dismissed her in meetings, she found ways to present quietly to others, building allies. Slowly, her determination began to carve out space where there had been none. Still, at night, she returned home exhausted. Noah would greet her at the door with open arms, his laughter dissolving her fatigue. She tucked him into bed and whispered stories, vowing silently never to let him see how much the day had bruised her. Alexander, for his part, was unsettled. There was something about Claire Bennett he could not ignore. She was infuriatingly stubborn, sharp-witted, unwilling to cower beneath his authority. Most women bent under his gaze. She met it with quiet fire. He told himself it was annoyance that drew his attention, nothing more. But late at night, as he poured another drink in his penthouse, her face intruded on his thoughts. Her eyes, steady and defiant, her voice, trembling but resolute. Something about her pulled at the edges of his memory, an itch he could not scratch, and Alexander Ward hated mysteries he could not solve. The tension between Claire Bennett and Alexander Ward became office legend within weeks. Employees whispered about it in the break room, their voices hushed, as though speaking too loudly might summon his icy stare. The new assistant who dared to stand her ground. The CEO, who seemed almost obsessed with breaking her. It was entertainment for some, a warning for others. For Claire, it was survival. Every morning she walked into Ward Beauty Group's towering glass building with her chin high and her resolve steel strong. She had no room for mistakes. Alexander scrutinized her every move, his questions designed like traps. He demanded reports at impossible hours, tore through presentations with surgical precision, assigned her projects far beyond the scope of an assistant. But Claire refused to bend. On one late afternoon, Alexander stood at the head of a long conference table, his expression carved from stone, as the marketing team pitched ideas for the company's new skincare line. Concepts fizzled under his sharp critiques, one after another. Finally, his storm-gray eyes flicked to Claire, who sat quietly at the side, her notepad filled with scribbles. "Ms. Bennett," he said, his tone edged with challenge, "since you seem to have all the answers in your notes, perhaps you'd like to share them." A ripple of tension passed through the room. Claire's pulse spiked, but she steadied herself. She rose, smoothing her skirt. "Actually," she began, her voice calm though her heart pounded, "I do have a suggestion." She outlined her vision, a campaign that celebrated natural beauty, targeting a younger demographic through authenticity rather than glamour. Her words flowed with quiet conviction, her research sharp, her ideas fresh. When she finished, silence settled. Alexander's eyes narrowed, studying her with something unreadable. Then, almost grudgingly, he gave a short nod. Interesting. Execute a proposal by next week. It was not praise, but it was not dismissal either. And in that small crack of acknowledgement, Claire found strength. The following days were grueling. Claire worked long into the night, compiling data, refining concepts, sketching designs. She stole hours after Noah was asleep, the glow of her laptop casting shadows across their modest apartment. Exhaustion gnawed at her, but determination fueled her every keystroke. When she presented her proposal, the board leaned forward, intrigued. Even Alexander, though he tried to mask it, could not hide the flicker of approval in his eyes. For the first time, Claire felt she had claimed a piece of ground in his empire. Meanwhile, Edward Ward could not let go of the image of the boy in the shopping mall. He sat in his study one evening, a glass of brandy untouched on the desk. The investigator's report lay open before him, filled with photographs and details about Claire Bennett, her years in Paris, the birth of her son, her return to New York. Edward's hands trembled slightly as he turned the page to a photograph clipped from a file. Noah, laughing in the park, a soccer ball at his feet. The resemblance was undeniable. Edward leaned back in his leather chair, staring at the boy's face until his own blurred with memory. He saw Alexander at that age, running across the family estate, his dark hair flying, his smile bright. The same eyes, the same tilt of the chin. Could it be possible? Edward was not a man prone to sentiment. His life had been defined by empires, by wealth and control. But as he sat alone, he felt something he had not allowed himself in years. Hope. If the boy was truly Alexander's, it meant more than legacy. It meant redemption for a son who had walled himself off from family, who had forgotten the meaning of love. Edward closed the file slowly, his decision made. He would not confront Alexander yet, not until he was certain, but he would watch, and he would find the truth. Back at Ward Beauty Group, Claire's star began to rise. Her ideas gained traction. Her work ethic won respect, even from those who had doubted her. She remained cautious, always aware of Alexander's piercing gaze, but she began to feel a measure of pride. Still, the man himself was relentless. One evening, as the office emptied, Alexander appeared at her desk. His presence filled the space, his suit immaculate, his cologne subtle yet commanding. "You've exceeded expectations," he said bluntly, though his tone was more observation than compliment. Claire looked up, wary. "Thank you," she replied simply, her voice guarded. He studied her for a long moment, as if searching for cracks in her armor. Then, unexpectedly, his lips curved in the faintest smile, one that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. "Don't get too comfortable," he said, turning to leave. Claire exhaled, her heart racing. She had no illusions about Alexander Ward. He was ruthless, calculating. And yet, there was something beneath the surface, a flicker she couldn't define, a shadow of curiosity that unsettled her more than his disdain ever had. At home, Noah remained her anchor. He greeted her each evening with stories of his day, his small arms wrapping around her waist, as though she were his entire world. Together they cooked simple meals, played games on the floor, laughed until her exhaustion melted away. Sometimes, when Noah fell asleep with his hand curled around hers, Claire would watch him and whisper a promise into the quiet. "I'll protect you, always, no matter what." But she did not yet know that fate was already moving, that secrets long buried were inching closer to the light. Edward Ward had never been a man to linger on uncertainty. In his world, hesitation costs millions. Yet now, hesitation gnawed at him in a way no business deal ever had. Night after night, he returned to the file on Claire Bennett and her son. Each time he flipped through the photographs, the resemblance tightened its grip on him. Noah's smile, Noah's eyes, Noah's unruly hair. Was Alexander reborn? but softened by innocence. Edward began sending his driver on small errands that always seemed to pass near Claire's neighborhood. Sometimes he even accompanied him, sitting in the back seat of his car as it idled at the curb, watching from the shadows. He saw Claire walk hand in hand with her boy, carrying grocery bags, laughing at something Noah whispered. The sight stirred something foreign in Edward's chest, a tenderness he thought long buried. Still, he remained silent. Confronting Alexander too soon could backfire. His son was proud, stubborn, defensive to the point of blindness. No, Edward needed proof, stronger than his own conviction, and so he waited, the secret burning hotter with each passing day. At Ward Beauty Group, the air between Claire and Alexander shifted subtly. He still challenged her, still pushed her beyond reason, but there were moments, now brief, disarming moments when his gaze lingered longer than necessary, when her sharp reply almost drew the shadow of a smile, when silence between them felt charged, not empty. Claire noticed, though she wished she hadn't. One evening, after a particularly brutal meeting, Claire remained in the conference room gathering her notes. The others had filed out, leaving only Alexander at the head of the table, scrolling through figures on his tablet. "You handled yourself well," he said suddenly, his voice breaking the quiet. Claire stilled, surprised. Compliments were not part of Alexander Ward's vocabulary. She glanced up warily. "Thank you," she replied, cautious. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a heartbeat, the hard lines of his expression softened. Something flickered in his eyes, curiosity, perhaps, or recognition he couldn't place. Then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. "Don't mistake it for approval," he said coolly, rising from his chair. "One good idea doesn't mean you've proven yourself." And just like that, the moment shattered. Claire exhaled, both rattled and strangely unsettled. She told herself it was irritation, nothing more. She could not afford anything more. But the city had a way of drawing people into its currents. One rainy evening, Claire found herself stranded outside the office, without an umbrella. The storm broke suddenly, sheets of water cascading down as thunder rolled across Manhattan. She stood beneath the awning, debating whether to run for the subway, when a black car pulled up to the curb. The window lowered, revealing Alexander in the back seat. His eyes met hers, cool and steady. "Get in," he said simply. Claire hesitated. "I'll manage." His jaw tightened, irritation flashing. "Don't be ridiculous. You'll be drenched before you reach the corner." Before she could protest again, the driver opened the door, and Claire, caught between pride and practicality, slid inside. The leather interior smelled faintly of cedar and spice. The hum of the city muffled beyond the tinted windows. They rode in silence at first, the tension thick. Rain streaked across the glass, distorting the blur of neon lights outside. Claire focused on the patterns of water, refusing to let her gaze drift toward the man beside her, but Alexander studied her openly. She looked tired. He noticed it now, the faint shadows under her eyes, the way she clutched her bag as though it were armor. And yet, there was strength in her posture, a resilience he rarely saw, even among the most hardened executives. "Why do you push yourself so hard?" he asked abruptly. The question caught her off guard. She turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "Because I don't have the luxury not to." Something in her tone, quiet, fierce, struck him. He didn't press further, but the words stayed with him long after the car pulled up to her modest apartment building. Claire thanked him stiffly and stepped out, clutching her bag tighter as the rain eased. She didn't see him watching from the car, his expression unreadable, as she disappeared inside. That night, Alexander poured himself a drink but didn't touch it. Claire's words echoed in his head. "I don't have the luxury not to." What did she mean? Why did she seem so familiar, so unyielding, as though she had built walls out of scars he couldn't see? He shook the thought away, frustrated with himself. He was Alexander Ward. He did not dwell on assistance. And yet, his mind betrayed him, circling back to her again and again. Meanwhile, Edward Ward's patience wore thin. He summoned his investigator again, demanding clarity. "TNA," he said curtly, "I don't care how you get it, but bring me certainty." "That boy," his voice cracked, uncharacteristically. He composed himself quickly. "That boy deserves acknowledgement." The investigator nodded, but Edward leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. He imagined Noah sitting at the family estate's dining table, laughter echoing against walls that had grown to silent. He imagined Alexander, hardened by ambition, finally softening under the weight of fatherhood. Edward's chest tightened. He would not allow the Ward legacy to end in emptiness. He would not let his son remain blind forever. At the office, the battle between Alexander and Claire continued, though its edges dulled into something more complex. He pushed her. She pushed back. Their exchanges crackled with unspoken tension, each confrontation layered with something dangerously close to attraction. Others noticed. Colleagues whispered about the unusual attention the CEO gave his assistant, but neither of them acknowledged it. To admit it aloud would be to cross a line neither was ready to face. For now, they remained locked in their uneasy dance foes on the surface. Something far more complicated beneath, and in the background, the truth inched closer, inevitable as the tide. The Ward estate in Westchester was silent, its grand halls echoing only with the ticking of an antique clock. Edward Ward sat in his study, the fire casting long shadows across the paneled walls. He held a folder in his hands, the weight of it heavier than any contract he had ever signed, when Alexander entered. Tall and sharp in his tailored suit, his expression held mild irritation. "You said it was urgent," he said, slipping off his gloves. "What is it this time? Another board squabble?" Edward's eyes lifted slowly to his son's. "Sit down." Alexander frowned, but complied. His father rarely spoke with such gravity. He folded himself into the leather chair opposite the desk, his impatience restrained but visible. Edward slid the folder across the desk. "Read." Alexander opened it, brows furrowed. Inside were photographs Claire, walking hand in hand with a young boy, reports detailing her years in Paris, her return to New York, her employment at Ward Beauty Group. Alexander flipped through the pages, his expression darkening. Then he froze. The photograph showed the boy in profile, his smile wide as he held a soccer ball under his arm. Alexander's heart slammed against his ribs. His grip on the paper tightened until it crumpled. The boy's features, those dark eyes, that jawline. The tilt of his smile, it was as though Alexander was staring into a mirror of his own childhood. He looked up sharply. "What is this?" His voice was low, dangerous. Edward's tone was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "That boy is Noah Bennett, Claire's son. He is 5 years old." The room seemed to tilt. Alexander's breath came short. Memories hazy, half-buried rushed back. A hotel suite in Las Vegas. The faceless woman who had vanished before dawn. "No," Alexander said, shaking his head. "It can't be." "It is." Edward's voice held no doubt. "He is your son." Alexander left the estate in silence, the folder clutched in his hand. His driver asked no questions as they sped back to the city. The night pressing heavy against the windows. At his penthouse, Alexander poured a drink, but didn't touch it. He stood at the window, staring out at the glittering Manhattan skyline. The folder open on the table behind him. He saw Noah's face every time he blinked. He saw Claire, her defiance, her strength, her secrets. The truth slammed into him. All this time, she had been raising his son, alone, and he had dismissed her as nothing, a nameless woman, a mistake. Rage flared. But beneath it was something far more unsettling. Guilt. He had to know. The next morning, Alexander's schedule lay abandoned as he followed Claire discreetly. He watched her walk Noah to a small elementary school in Queens, her hand clasped around the boy's. He saw Noah laugh, skipping on the sidewalk, Claire smiling down at him with a tenderness that pierced Alexander's chest. He remained hidden, but he could not look away. Noah was his. The realization was staggering, grounding, terrifying. When Noah ran ahead toward the school gates, Claire called after him, her voice soft, warm. Alexander swallowed hard. He had never heard his own name spoken with such care. That evening, Alexander found himself outside the modest apartment building where Claire lived. He stood on the opposite sidewalk, the cold air biting at his skin as he watched light glow in the window above. Silhouettes moved inside Claire, setting the table. Noah, bouncing excitedly in his chair. A domestic scene, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. For the first time in years, Alexander felt like an outsider to his own life. He had built empires, commanded boardrooms, but here was something he had never touched. Something fragile, intimate, real. He stayed until the lights dimmed, his chest tight with something he refused to name. The following week, fate forced proximity. Claire was in the office early, reviewing reports when Alexander entered. She stiffened instantly, the tension palpable. "Ms. Bennett," he said, his voice lower than usual. She looked up wary. "Yes, Mr. Ward." He studied her face, the curve of her jaw, the steadiness of her gaze. For years he had overlooked her, underestimated her. Now every detail seemed sharper, weighted with meaning. He wanted to confront her, to demand why she had kept Noah from him. But something stopped him. The fear in her eyes, the protective set of her shoulders. It was for Noah, always for Noah. So instead, he said nothing. He only nodded, turned, and left. But inside, a storm raged. Alexander began making excuses to linger near Claire's assignments, to observe her in meetings. He told himself it was strategy, necessity. But his eyes strayed to her more often than they should, and when he passed by the school one morning, slowing his car just enough to see Noah running across the playground, he felt something he had never known before. Longing for the chance to step onto that field, to call out to his son, to be seen not as a stranger, but as father. That night, Alexander sat alone in his penthouse. For the first time in years, he did not pour a drink. He sat in silence, his hands steepled, his reflection in the glass window fractured by city lights. The truth was undeniable. Noah was his. Claire had been the victim, not the schemer he had once assumed. And now, Alexander Ward faced a reality more daunting than any hostile takeover, any billion-dollar merger. He had to become a father. The first time Alexander Ward approached his son, it was almost by accident, or at least, that was how he planned it to appear. Claire had taken Noah to Central Park on a breezy Saturday afternoon, the kind of day when the city softened under sunshine. Children shouted on the playground, dogs chased frisbees across the grass, and Noah stood clutching a soccer ball nearly too big for him. "Ready, Mommy?" he called, his grin wide. Claire smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Go on. Kick it." Noah dropped the ball, gave it a solid kick, and squealed as it rolled farther than he expected. It skidded across the grass and landed directly at the polished shoes of a man passing by. Alexander bent down, lifted the ball in one hand, and looked up. His eyes found Claire's instantly. She froze. The color drained from her face, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "Mr. Ward," she whispered. "Mommy." Noah ran up, his eyes bright. He looked at Alexander with innocent curiosity. Alexander crouched, holding out the ball. "This yours, champ?" Noah nodded eagerly, taking it. "Thanks." Mr. Alexander's lips curved in a faint smile, awkward, almost hesitant. "You've got a good kick. Mind if I try?" Without waiting for permission, he nudged the ball gently back, toward the boy. Noah giggled and kicked it again, this time straighter. The two passed the ball, back and forth. Laughter spilling from Noah's mouth with each exchange. Claire stood rigid, torn between panic and disbelief. Every instinct screamed to pull Noah away, to shield him. But her son's laughter rang out, pure and unguarded, and she found herself unable to move. Alexander looked up once more, his gaze meeting hers. There was no arrogance there, no cold command, only something startlingly human longing, raw and unmasked. From that day, Alexander began to appear more often. Sometimes it was at the school gates, his sleek black car parked discreetly across the street. Other times it was at the park, where Noah would squeal with delight at the chance to kick the ball with his new friend. Claire watched warily, arms crossed, her heart caught between fear and something far more dangerous, the sight of her son's joy. One morning, as they prepared for school, Noah asked brightly, "Mummy, do you think Mr. Alexander will be there again?" "He's fun." Claire's breath hitched. She forced a smile. "Maybe, sweetheart. But remember, he's just someone passing by." Noah frowned, confused but unconcerned. "I like him." Claire turned away quickly, hiding the storm in her chest. Alexander, meanwhile, was navigating unfamiliar terrain. For years, his life had been measured in numbers and power plays. He knew how to read contracts, crush competitors, build empires. But how to toss a ball with a V-rolled, how to crouch in the grass without looking ridiculous, these were lessons he had never studied. And yet, with Noah, it came strangely easily again. The boy shouted, his cheeks flushed with excitement. Alexander laughed a sound he barely recognized as his own hand passed the ball back. "You've got energy, kid. You'll be a pro in no time." The words slipped out naturally, and for a moment, Alexander imagined himself on the sidelines of a future game, cheering louder than anyone. The thought startled him, but it didn't repel him. It warmed him. Claire tried to keep her distance, but the walls she had built began to show cracks. One evening, she watched through the kitchen window as Alexander knelt beside Noah in the courtyard, showing him how to tie his shoelaces tighter. Noah beamed up at him, proud of the neat bow. Later, when she tucked Noah into bed, he whispered, "Mommy, Mr. Alexander makes me feel safe." Claire's throat tightened. She brushed Noah's hair back, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "You're already safe, darling," she said softly. But inside, her heart ached with truth, because Noah had never said those words before at work. The dynamic between Claire and Alexander shifted subtly. He still challenged her, but there was a new edge to it, not hostility, but attention. His eyes followed her longer in meetings. His voice softened when he addressed her, though he masked it under brusque professionalism. One evening, after a long presentation, Alexander dismissed the team, but asked Claire to stay behind. She braced herself for criticism, but instead, he surprised her. "You're doing good work," he said quietly. Claire blinked, startled. "Thank you, Mr. Ward." Silence stretched between them, charged and heavy. His gaze lingered, searching her face as though trying to read secrets she refused to reveal. Finally, he exhaled, turning away. "You should go. Your son is waiting." The words sent a shiver through her. She left quickly, her heart pounding, wondering how much he knew, how much he had guessed. Alexander's nights changed as well. No longer did he fill them with endless scotch and hollow victories. Instead, he found himself replaying the sound of Noah's laughter. The way the boy's hand felt small, but certain in his own. He thought of Claire's wary eyes, the strength etched into her every movement. For the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of something more powerful than ambition. Responsibility, desire, hope. Edward Ward observed all of this with quiet satisfaction. From the windows of his study, from discreet reports delivered to his desk, he saw the pieces aligning. His son, once consumed by work and pride, was beginning to soften. The boy Noah, was unknowingly teaching Alexander what no boardroom ever could. But Edward also knew the truth could not remain hidden much longer. Secrets had a way of demanding light, and when it came, it would test them all. Claire, alone in her apartment one night, sat watching Noah sleep. His chest rose and fell with steady breaths, his lashes resting on his cheeks. She thought of the man who had entered their lives like a storm, dangerous, unwanted, yet now impossible to ignore. Alexander Ward was changing, and her son, her sweet Noah, was happier than she had ever seen him. Claire pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, because deep down, she feared what she could no longer deny. Noah needed his father. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds as Claire helped Noah button his shirt for school. His hair stuck up in wild tufts, his grin mischievous. "Mommy, can Mr. Alexander take me to school today?" he asked suddenly, his eyes bright with anticipation. Claire's hands froze. "Why would you ask that?" he said. "Maybe," Noah replied matter-of-fact, "and he promised we could stop for pancakes on the way." Claire inhaled sharply. She hadn't agreed to this. She hadn't even known Alexander had spoken to Noah about it. Yet, when she looked into her son's eager face, she felt the resistance in her chest soften. "We'll see," she said cautiously. "Don't get your hopes up." But that very morning, when they stepped outside their building, Alexander's sleek black car was already waiting. The door opened, and Alexander stepped out. He wore no suit today, just a simple shirt, sleeves rolled, a jacket slung casually over his arm. He looked less like the formidable CEO who ruled boardrooms, and more like a man attempting, awkwardly, to fit into an ordinary life. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a flicker of nervousness. Noah's face lit up. "You came." Alexander smiled, a rare genuine smile that startled Claire with its warmth. "A promise is a promise. Ready for pancakes?" Noah nodded enthusiastically and dashed toward the car. Claire lingered, arms folded, her expression wary. Alexander turned to her. "Come with us," he said quietly. For his sake. Reluctantly, she agreed. At the diner, Noah devoured pancakes drowned in syrup, his laughter filling the booth. Alexander watched with fascination, as though he had discovered something entirely new. "Slow down, champ," he said, sliding a napkin across the table. "You'll choke." Noah giggled, cheeks sticky. "I'm fine, Daddy." The words slipped out unthinking, natural. Claire stiffened. Alexander's eyes widened, his breath catching. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then softly, Alexander said, "You can call me that, if you want." Noah grinned, unconcerned, and returned to his pancakes. Claire, however, stared at Alexander, her pulse racing. The look in his eyes was not calculated or cold. It was raw, and it frightened her more than his ruthlessness ever had. Days turned into weeks, and Alexander carved space into Noah's life, piece by piece. He showed up at soccer practice, his tall frame unmistakable at the edge of the field. While other fathers shouted instructions, Alexander simply clapped, his voice strong and encouraging. "Good job, Noah. Keep going." The boy beamed, running faster, kicking harder. Every time he glanced at Alexander, his pride doubled. After practice, Alexander knelt in the grass, tying Noah's cleats with surprising patience. Claire stood nearby, her heart twisting. The man who had once been nothing but a shadow from her nightmares was now sitting in the grass, dirt on his tailored pants, smiling at their son. Another morning, Claire found herself late for a meeting. Panic threatened until Alexander appeared at the apartment door. Ty half nodded, holding a cup of coffee in one hand. "I'll take him," he said simply. She hesitated, but Noah was already grabbing his backpack, excitement brimming. On the subway ride downtown, Claire couldn't concentrate on her notes. All she could picture was Noah in the back seat of Alexander's car, chattering away about dinosaurs and soccer, and Alexander, Actually listening with patience she never thought him capable of. When she returned home that evening, Noah was waiting with a story about how Daddy had bought him a chocolate milkshake after school. His smile was so wide, Claire's reprimands died on her lips, bit by bit. Claire's defenses eroded. One evening, she found herself standing in the kitchen doorway, unnoticed, watching Alexander help Noah with homework. The boy scribbled numbers, frowning, while Alexander leaned over, explaining with a steady calm Claire had rarely seen in him at work. When Noah finally solved the problem, Alexander ruffled his hair, and Noah laughed. Claire's throat tightened. The scene was simple, domestic, ordinary, and it undid her more than any grand gesture could. Later that night, after Noah had fallen asleep, Alexander lingered by the door. "He's a good kid," he said quietly. Claire crossed her arms. "He's my whole world." Alexander's eyes met hers. "And now he's mine too." The words hung between them, frightening in their intensity. Claire looked away, her heart pounding. For Alexander, the transformation was undeniable. Board meetings still demanded his attention, contracts still required his signature. But the moments he treasured now were not deals won, but afternoons at the park, mornings at the school gates, evenings spent reading storybooks aloud, until Noah fell asleep on his shoulder. It unnerved him how natural it felt, how quickly his priorities shifted. For years, he had defined himself by ambition, by dominance. Now, the sound of his son's laughter meant more than any quarterly report, and through it all, Claire's presence lingered like gravity. He noticed the way she softened when Noah hugged him, the way her guard wavered when she thought no one was watching. She was changing too. One night, after walking Claire and Noah home, Alexander paused at the apartment door. The hallway light cast shadows across his face, softening the hard lines. "Thank you," Claire said reluctantly. "For what?" "For being there for him." Her voice was quiet, almost unwilling. Alexander studied her, his expression unreadable. "It's not just for him, Claire." Her breath caught. She turned quickly, fumbling for her keys, unwilling to let him see how deeply the words shook her inside. When Noah was asleep, Claire sat by the window, staring at the city lights. She thought of Alexander's laughter at the soccer field, his patience over math problems, the warmth in his eyes when Noah called him Daddy. Her heart ached with confusion, because for the first time in years, she wondered if forgiveness was possible. The city glowed with winter lights, strings of gold and silver wrapped around lampposts, store windows glittering with holiday displays. Snow had begun to fall, soft and hushed, blanketing New York in fragile brightness. Claire Bennett walked briskly along Fifth Avenue, her scarf pulled tight around her neck. She had meant only to buy Noah a small gift, something simple. Yet, as she stepped out of the bookstore, she nearly collided with Alexander Ward. He stood tall in his long coat, the snow dusting his dark hair. For once, he wasn't surrounded by assistants or drivers. It was just him, standing under the soft glow of a streetlight, his gaze steady on her. "Claire," he said quietly, almost cautiously. She hesitated. "Mr. Ward." His lips curved faintly, as though the title wounded him. "Alexander," he corrected. The air between them tightened. Claire turned, intent on walking away, but his voice followed. "Dinner. Tomorrow night. No business, no meetings. Just dinner." She froze. 4 months, he had been building something fragile between them through Noah, through gestures she tried not to see. She wanted to say no, to protect the walls she had so carefully rebuilt. But she heard Noah's laughter in her memory, echoing with the word Daddy. After a long pause, she whispered, "One dinner." The restaurant was intimate, candlelight flickering against brick walls, jazz humming softly in the background. Claire wore a simple black dress, her hair falling loose. She told herself it was just dinner, nothing more. Alexander, however, seemed determined to prove otherwise. He asked her questions, not about business, but about her years in Paris, her favorite books, the songs she hummed when Noah was small. His attention was focused, his interruptions rare. It unsettled her more than his arrogance ever had. "You've changed," she said at one point, almost accusingly. He met her gaze, his expression unflinching. "I had to, for him, for you." Her chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to tell him change couldn't be so simple. But his words were not boastful. They were quiet, sincere, and sincerity was harder to fight. Over the following weeks, Alexander's pursuit grew steady, relentless in its gentleness. He sent flowers to her office, not roses, but wildflowers in soft hues, the kind she had once mentioned preferring in passing. He brought Noah small gifts that spoke of thoughtfulness rather than extravagance, a model airplane, a set of paints. One evening, Claire returned home to find their modest apartment glowing with the scent of dinner. Alexander stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, Noah giggling as he stirred a pot far too big for him. "You cook?" Claire asked, astonished. Alexander glanced up, a rare hint of embarrassment coloring his features. "Learning. He's the teacher." Noah grinned proudly, sauce splattered across his shirt. "Daddy says I'm a better chef." The sound of daddy from her son's lips, spoken with such joy, struck Claire's heart with painful sweetness. That night, as they sat at the table eating imperfect pasta, laughter filling the small apartment, Claire felt something she hadn't in years. Belonging. Still fear lingered. On a quiet Sunday morning, Claire walked with Alexander along the snowy path in Central Park while Noah ran ahead, chasing birds. "You can't keep doing this," she said suddenly, her voice sharp with panic. "Showing up, buying flowers, making promises." Alexander stopped, facing her fully. "Why not?" "Because I can't trust it," she whispered. Her throat tightened, tears pricking. "I trusted once, and I lost everything." His expression softened, but his voice was steady. "I know I can't erase the past, but I can build something new, brick by brick, if that's what it takes." She shook her head, struggling to breathe. But then Noah turned, his laughter echoing across the snow, his arms flung wide as he ran toward them. Alexander bent down, sweeping the boy into his arms, spinning him with effortless strength. Claire watched, her heart breaking and mending all at once, because her son's smile had never been so bright. That night, alone in her apartment, Claire sat by the window as snow fell thick outside. She thought of Alexander's words, his actions, the way Noah leaned into his father's embrace without fear. Her heart ached with longing, with the possibility of something she had sworn she'd never allow again, for the first time. She wondered if her walls were not protecting her, but imprisoning her. February stretched across New York with its icy winds and sharp skies, but Claire Bennett found herself warmed by small, disarming gestures that she could no longer ignore. One afternoon, she returned to her office after a grueling meeting and stopped short. A single book sat on her desk, wrapped in brown paper with a ribbon of deep green. No card, no signature. She untied the ribbon cautiously and unwrapped the cover. It was a worn edition of Les Miserables, the very book she had once confessed, years ago in Paris, had carried her through lonely nights. Her hands trembled. She had mentioned it in passing during their dinner, never expecting him to remember. But he had. And now the novel sat on her desk, like a whisper from the past, saying, "I see you." I listened. Later that week, Alexander invited her to a dinner, unlike the first. The restaurant was not lavish, but tucked away in Brooklyn, the kind of place lit with strings of bulbs overhead and filled with the scent of garlic and warm bread. A small jazz band played in the corner. It wasn't power or grandeur he offered her this time. It was intimacy. Claire sat across from him, wary, her fingers folded in her lap. You've taken me to boardrooms dressed as restaurants before, she said lightly, testing him. Why here? Alexander's gaze softened. Because I don't want to impress you. I want you to know me. His words caught her off guard. For a long moment, she studied him, searching for the man who had once been nothing but arrogance and cold calculation. Instead, she found sincerity. The dinner passed slowly, gently. They shared stories of childhood, hers filled with small-town simplicity, his with the suffocating weight of wealth. They spoke of Paris, of Noah, of fears they rarely voiced. At one point, Claire really laughed, the sound unguarded. Alexander froze, drinking in the sight as though it were the rarest treasure. I missed that, he murmured. She blinked, startled. Missed what? Your laugh. Color rose to her cheeks. She looked away, flustered, but her heart betrayed her with its quickened beat. Days turned into weeks, and Alexander's gestures accumulated like quiet notes in a symphony. He arrived at Noah's school concert, not in the back row hidden in shadow, but front and center, clapping louder than anyone when Noah sang. He brought Claire coffee just the way she liked it before early meetings. He remembered birthdays not just hers, but of people on her team, sending small gifts in her name. He was not only courting her, he was learning her world, piece by piece, and against her will. Claire found herself softening. One evening, as snow fell thick outside, Alexander appeared at her apartment door. In his hands he held no flowers, no grand offering, only a box of takeout from the small noodle shop she adored in Chinatown. I thought you might be too tired to cook, he said simply. Noah squealed with delight, dragging Alexander inside. The three of them ate cross-legged on the living room floor, chopsticks clicking, laughter spilling between them. When Noah fell asleep later, sprawled across the couch, Claire and Alexander lingered in the dim glow of the lamp. Why are you doing this? She asked softly, unable to meet his eyes. Why now? Alexander leaned forward, his voice low, steady. Because I was blind before, because I let arrogance blind me to what mattered, and because I won't make that mistake again. Her heart thudded painfully. She wanted to believe him. She was terrified to believe him. The change in him was undeniable. At the office, he remained a formidable leader, his presence commanding. Yet even there, Claire noticed the shift. His temper shorter-lived, his patience stretched farther. He asked for her opinion, not as a test, but as if he valued it. And when she walked into his office one late afternoon, he was not buried in contracts, but reading a children's book. She raised an eyebrow, expanding your literary horizons. His lips quirked. Noah's favorite. He asked me to read it tonight, and I didn't want to stumble over the words. The sight of him, this powerful man, studying, where the wild things are like it was, a treaty struck her with such unexpected tenderness, she had to turn away. Still, Claire wrestled with fear. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, torn between the safety of solitude and the dangerous pull of hope. But her resolve cracked one quiet evening when she returned home late from work. She opened the door to find Alexander and Noah sprawled on the floor, a fortress of blankets and pillows towering above them. Noah's laughter filled the apartment as Alexander held a flashlight under his chin, telling a ghost story with exaggerated dramatics. When Alexander noticed her, he paused, almost guilty. But Noah shouted, "Mummy, come inside. Daddy built us a castle." Claire's throat tightened. She slipped off her coat and joined them, crawling under the fortress. Noah nestled between them, radiant, and for the first time, Claire felt the ache of loneliness ease. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine, what if this could be real? That night, after Noah was asleep, Claire stood by the window, staring at the city lights. Alexander came to stand beside her, close enough that she felt the warmth of him. "Claire," he said quietly, "I know you're scared, but I'm not asking for your trust all at once. Just a chance." She turned to him slowly, her eyes glistening. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unspoken. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded, and Alexander, for the first time in years, felt hope settle solidly in his chest. Spring arrived in New York with quiet extravagance. The city thawed from its winter hush, tulips blooming in Central Park, cafe tables spilling onto sidewalks. Claire Bennett found herself lighter than she had in years, though she scarcely admitted it to herself. Noah thrived, his laughter louder, his energy boundless, his eyes brighter with each passing day. And Alexander Ward was no longer a shadow, lurking at the edges of their lives. He was present, solid, steady, carving space beside them with a patience that surprised even him. Claire still held her guard, but the cracks had widened into open doors. One Friday evening, Alexander invited them both to the Ward family estate in Westchester. Noah's excitement was immediate. "A sleepover at Grandpa's mansion," he exclaimed, his small hands clapping. Claire hesitated, but Edward Ward's invitation had been gentle, almost pleading. She agreed, though her nerves coiled tight. The evening unfolded warmly. Edward welcomed them with surprising tenderness, showing Noah his collection of antique toy trains. Alexander guided Claire through the gardens lit with lanterns. The air scented with roses. It was there, under the soft glow of the lanterns, that Alexander stopped walking. "Claire," he said, his voice low but steady, "there's something I need to ask you." She turned, her breath catching at the intensity in his eyes. Then the path ahead bloomed with light. Tiny bulbs strung across the hedges flickered to life, illuminating a small clearing where a table stood, draped in white, adorned with Lily, her favorite. A string quartet played softly in the distance. Claire gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Alexander dropped to one knee. 5 years ago. "Fate forced us together in the worst of ways," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I was blind, arrogant, and I failed you. But these past months, Claire, you've shown me what matters. You've shown me love, strength, forgiveness. And know our son, he deserves the family he was born into. He deserves us. Together." He opened a small velvet box. Inside, a ring caught the light, an oval diamond, framed by delicate sapphires. Elegant, rather than ostentatious. "Claire Bennett," Alexander said softly, his voice trembling despite the steadiness of his posture, "will you marry me?" Claire's vision blurred with tears. For a moment, the world narrowed to the man before her, the boy waiting for her answer, the ache in her chest that had been there for years. "Mommy," Noah's small voice piped up. He had appeared behind them, holding Edward's hand, his eyes wide with anticipation. "Say yes." Claire let out a shaky laugh, tears spilling freely now. She looked at Alexander, the man who had once been her nightmare, now transformed into her safe harbor. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Invitations embossed with gold leaf, a designer gown shipped from Paris, the cathedral in Manhattan reserved, its stained glass windows glowing with promise. But beneath the grandeur, Claire held on to something simpler. The quiet mornings when Alexander made Noah pancakes. The evenings when the three of them sat reading together. The wedding was spectacle, yes, but the love was real. The day arrived bathed in sunlight, the sky a flawless blue. Guests filled the cathedral, their jewels glittering, their whispers echoing against marble columns. The Ward name carried weight, and every seat was occupied by business magnates, politicians, celebrities. Yet, as Claire stood in the antechamber, her gown flowing like liquid silk, her hands trembling around her bouquet, she thought only of Noah's beaming face and Alexander's steady gaze waiting for her at the altar. The doors opened. Gasps rippled through the crowd as she stepped forward, radiant, her veil trailing behind. Noah, dressed in a tiny tuxedo, walked proudly beside her, Holding her hand at the altar, Alexander's eyes never left her. His expression was stripped bare of arrogance, of calculation. He looked at her as though she were the only soul in the world. The ceremony passed like a dream, vows spoken with trembling voices, promises anchored in sincerity. When the priest declared them husband and wife, Alexander cupped Claire's face, his kiss lingering, reverent. Applause thundered, but Claire heard only Noah's delighted cheer. Yay, Mommy and Daddy. The reception glittered beneath crystal chandeliers. Champagne flowed, violins sang, laughter rang through the ballroom. Alexander danced with Claire, his hand steady on her waist, her head resting against his chest. "You've changed my life," she murmured. He leaned down, brushing his lips against her hair. "You've saved mine." Later, Noah tugged at their hands, pulling them onto the dance floor. The three of them swayed together, laughter bubbling up. Guests watched, envious, charmed by the sight of power and tenderness entwined. As the night drew to a close, Claire stepped out onto the balcony for air. The city sparkled in the distance, the hum of the reception behind her. Alexander joined her, slipping his arm around her shoulders. "This," he said softly, looking out at the skyline, "is only the beginning." Claire leaned into him, her heart full. "It's enough," she whispered. And when Noah burst through the doors, running into their embrace, Claire knew finally, irrevocably, that they were a family. The Hamptons' house sat bathed in the soft light of late afternoon, its white shutters gleaming, its garden alive with lavender and roses. The ocean stretched just beyond, the waves rolling in steady rhythm. A lullaby against the summer air. Claire Ward stood on the back porch, a glass of iced tea in her hand, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The breeze lifted strands of her hair, carrying with it the sound of laughter. On the lawn below, Alexander tossed a football to Noah. The boy, now 8, sprinted across the grass, his limbs long and lean, his shout ringing with delight. Alexander's laugh followed, deep and unrestrained. Echoing against the water, Claire smiled, her chest swelling with something so steady and profound it almost frightened her. "Peace. Go long, champ," Alexander called, his voice booming with good humor. Noah darted forward, arms wide, and caught the ball with a triumphant cheer. He turned, running back toward his father. Alexander scooped him up, spinning him high into the air. The boys' laughter carried across the yard, brighter than any music. Claire set her glass down and walked toward them, her bare feet brushing against the grass. When she reached them, Noah bounded to her side, shoving the football into her hands. "Your turn, Mommy," he cried. Claire shook her head, laughing. "I'm not as good as you two." "Doesn't matter," Alexander said, his eyes warm, his smile crooked. "We'll teach you." So she threw the ball awkwardly crooked. It skidded against the grass, far short of its target. Noah doubled over with giggles. Alexander chuckled, shaking his head. "Not bad," he teased, slipping an arm around her waist. "We'll work on your form." Claire leaned into him, rolling her eyes. But her smile betrayed her as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold. They settled onto the porch together. Noah sprawled on the steps, drawing superheroes in his notebook, while Claire curled against Alexander's side, her head resting on his shoulder. "This," she whispered, almost to herself. "I never thought I'd have this." Alexander kissed her temple, his lips lingering. "Neither did I, but I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you keep it." Her throat tightened. She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of him, the salt of the ocean, the sweetness of blooming roses. Later, when Noah had been tucked into bed, his room filled with books and soccer posters and model airplanes, Claire and Alexander lingered in the quiet of their bedroom. The windows were open, the ocean breeze cool against their skin. Alexander stood at the dresser, unbuttoning his shirt, and caught her reflection in the mirror. She sat on the edge of the bed, her gaze soft, her smile faint. "What?" he asked, amused, Claire shook her head slowly. I was just thinking. The man I met all those years ago, the arrogant CEO, who terrified me, I don't see him anymore. Alexander crossed the room, kneeling before her. His hands found hers, strong yet gentle. He's gone, he said simply. You and Noah changed me. You gave me something I never thought I deserved. Her fingers tightened around his. And you gave me safety. You gave Noah a father. That's more than I ever dreamed. He lifted her hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. No more dreams, Claire. Just reality. Just us. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, casting golden patterns across the floor. Claire woke to the sound of laughter drifting from the kitchen. She slipped on her robe and padded down the hall, her heart already full. Alexander stood at the stove, sleeves rolled, a spatula in hand. Noah perched on a stool, his face smeared with flour, giggling uncontrollably. Pancakes again? Claire asked, laughing. His request, Alexander replied, mock serious. I am but a servant to the king. Noah raised his fork like a scepter. Extra syrup, Daddy. Claire shook her head, smiling so wide it hurt. She leaned against the doorway, taking in the scene, the man she once feared, now humming softly as he cooked. The boy who had been her only light, now radiant with love. The home filled not with wealth alone, but with warmth. And she knew, with a certainty that reached bone deep, that this was there forever.